Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and I've decided to just do a lot of series in a row. So we're going to be on another series, the Doctor Dolittle series by Hugh Lofting. This is, of course, the first book that was published in the series, and I want to say that the big thing about the Doctor Dolittle books is that they are strikingly different from both the films that bear that name. The Rex Harrison, which is much closer to the books than the later one with what's his name? I don't recall. It'll come to me probably after I finished recording this. Anyway, the thing about the Rex Harrison musical is that it came out in the 1950s, I think it was, and you know, it's a second-rate musical with Rex Harrison, who is, despite whatever people say about his actual personality, it's his usual excellent caliber of acting, but the Dr. Dolittle in that is very much unlike the one in the book. And then there is the film that came out in the early 2000s and its sequel, with, I believe it was Eddie Murphy, that's the name I was looking for. And the thing about the Eddie Murphy one is that the Eddie Murphy film is basically nothing like the books. It's not merely a matter of it being set in the rough present as compared to the past. That this was published in 1920, this book, and is set probably in the 1870s, because at the start of this book, the Hugh Lofting makes it very clear that it is set in the time of our grandparents or something to that effect. And so, you know, it's set a long time before this book was published. So late 1800s, give or take. Whereas, you know, the Eddie Murphy is the early 2000s. But the thing about the Eddie Murphy movie is that Eddie Murphy's ability to talk to animals in that movie is fundamentally different, because the story of Dr. Dolittle is a story about a man who talks to animals not because he has some magic psychic connection with animals, but because a parrot named Polynesia teaches him the language of the animals, teaches him how to understand dog body language and exactly what a dog is saying, to understand how pigs communicate, to understand how monkeys communicate, to understand what all of the sounds and body movements mean, so that he can have conversations with animals. And Dr. Dolittle speaks with animals not because of magic, but because of speculative fiction science. That's the big thing about this is, what he's doing in this book is he is studying very hard and working very hard to understand. And he's a genuine, kind man who has absolutely no grasp on the realities of existing in the then contemporary modern day. That he just doesn't function like a normal person. And so the book opens with a man who was a people doctor to start with, but he really liked animals, and so he kept on bringing more animals into his house. That he kept mice in his piano and hedgehogs in the kitchen and all kinds of things, and eventually his house was just overrun by animals, and nobody wanted to come to his house to see him as a doctor. And so he gets poorer and poorer, and his sister, who is acting as his housekeeper, gets more and more aggravated with him because he keeps on having all of these animals, and they're not making money. He doesn't have the money to keep paying to run a household, and he has to feed all the animals, and she's very unhappy with him. Eventually, he is taught how to speak to animals, and one of his very few human patients left suggests that he should become an animal doctor. And the doctor does this, and at first he's making money hand over fist again because, of course, what he can do is when somebody brings their overfed pet poodle to him, he can talk to the poodle, and the poodle can explain, yes, it hurts here, and it does this, and I need that. And so he can diagnose for the poodle the way we would diagnose a human, in that you can ask a human what their symptoms are, and that human can tell the doctor, my leg hurts when I do this, and the doctor can say, well, then don't do that, or whatever. But eventually he, all of the animals that come by hear about the amazing man who can actually talk to them, and so he winds up with his house being invaded by things like a crocodile from a passing circus that decided that he didn't want to stay with the circus anymore. He wants to stay with the human who will, be able to communicate with him. So people stop bringing their pets around because the doctor has an alligator crocodile living in his back garden, and they say, I don't want my dog around the crocodile you have in your back garden. And his sister loses patience with him and leaves him and gets married, and so he has no housekeeper. And the thing is that eventually he starts to run out of money again. And that's when the adventure starts, because that's when he gets a message brought by a swallow who has come up from Africa. And this swallow brings a message from the monkeys in Africa saying, we've got some kind of monkey epidemic going around. Can you please come and cure our monkey epidemic? So he heads south to Africa, and there are various adventures as they manage to get a hold of a boat and get down to Africa, and then they land there. And, I would argue that this is not a book that is particularly colonial in nature, because the first thing he's greeted by when the local African king, sees this white man landing on his shores, he says, you're not going to get to wander through my land unaccompanied, or indeed in any way, because what happened was we let a bunch of white men tramp through here, and they killed all of our elephants, took all their ivory, and then left with never so much as a thank you. It's a very pointed awareness of what people have done of what the English had done in places like Africa, of tramping through there, taking all the ivory, and then tramping off again, as though somehow what they did was okay. But since the doctor only wants to pass through on his way to where there are a bunch of monkeys who need treatment, he's, not particularly happy about this exchange. Anyways, they get out of this by some rank trickery, which is, frankly, portions of the trickery that goes on in this book are mildly morally reprehensible. However, the morally reprehensible stuff tends to be done by Polynesia the parrot, who strikes one as having no patience with anyone ever, and does what she wants. Polynesia's kind of like that. She's a wonderful character in that she actually does not care about anybody. She cares about the doctor because she likes him, but, she just says whatever she wants to say and doesn't care about anybody else's opinion. So she tricks the African king into letting them go by pretending that the doctor has some kind of magical powers and using her skills at mimicry to sound like the doctor and so on. I particularly love the fact that when the king first wakes up, he thinks that it's his wife coming back from a party, and he asks, "Is that you, Ermintrude?" Because Ermintrude is a marvelously traditional African name, is it not? Not a name that gets nearly enough play in fiction, I feel. Anyways, but they manage to escape. They manage to treat the monkeys. They have to trek back across the king's country to manage to get home. There's incidents with pirates, with using swallows to pull the ship, and using swallows to pull the ship is actually handled interestingly, because what the idea is that they need to escape some pirates, and they need to go fast, so what they do is they ask a flock of swallows to pull their ship, and what he says is, there were 1,000 strings, each with 2,000 swallows on it. Now, I don't know how strong swallows actually are, but the idea of, probably a couple million swallows all pulling together, it's not an impossible thought to have a couple million swallows pulling your ship along, and in theory at least, managing to get, just in theory, managing to get that many swallows to drag your ship across the ocean. There's a possibility that could work. Anyways, so they manage to make their way back, make a fortune stealing from pirates, get home, and settle in with, one assumes, enough money to live comfortably back home in England, and set up shop, having left several members of their crew behind, because Polynesia and the monkey and the crocodile are all African and thus wanted to stay in Africa. And so it's an interesting little book. It's an interesting speculative fiction thing, because this is a book that is solidly grounded in a world without magic. This is, nothing that happens in this book is magic. Nothing that happens in this book is remotely paranormal. Everything in this book is theoretically, imaginarily, because most people agree that you cannot in fact have a conversation with a crocodile. But it's something that's functionally non-mystical, and also not science fiction-y. There's no weird, technology that nobody's heard of or anything. It's just speculation. And so this is one of those books that the phrase speculative fiction is really, really meant for, because it's grounded in reality. It's just asking a single what-if question, really. And that question, of course, to state the obvious, is, what if animals could communicate to the same degree and in the same sort of mental space as humans? Would it be possible to communicate with them and have conversations with them that were functionally like those of humans? And it asks that, and then tells this story about a protagonist who is gentle and kind, and whose biggest flaw, and it is a flaw after all, is his complete divorce from the reality of functioning in the human world. And so Hugh Lofting really, really creates a lovely, interesting story with conflict and hardship, and a flawed protagonist, but one that you really, really root for as you go through this book. I will also say that lovely moment in the book when their ship stops off at the Canary Islands. Can't you tell it's the Canary Islands? Listen to all those canaries. And a rat tells him, we're leaving this ship because it's going to sink. We know it's going to sink. It's like an instinct that we rats have. And people always say, like rats deserting a sinking ship, like it's a bad thing, says the rat. When the ship starts to sink, you don't want to stay on it. I don't understand why it's such a bad thing. So, yeah, I love that. Anyways, so that's the first book of the Doctor Dolittle series by Hugh Lofting, and the things that I have to say about it, and that is everything. So I will see you all next week.